Hello, this is Anna Hill with Farming Today This Week podcast. Too many pigs, not enough space, farmers struggling to sell their livestock.
Some people that are worst affected are starting to burst at the seams.
New strategies for tackling the spread of animal disease. We ask how much is being done to stop it getting here in the first place.
Managing illegal imports continues to be really important.
And prize-winning sheep at the Balmoral Show in Northern Ireland.
We didn't think she'd be able to do it because she had two bad legs as a lamb, and then she goes in her class. It was very unexpected.
We'll have more from there a little bit later. Let's start with chickens, eggs and cages. In the UK, egg-laying chickens are allowed to be kept in so-called enriched colony cages. The old battery cages were banned back in 2012. Well, now vets organisations are calling for a ban on imports of eggs produced by caged hens and a phasing out of the legal enriched colony cages here in the UK. The British Veterinary Association and British Veterinary Poultry Association are supporting the government's plan to end the use of enriched cage systems here. The junior vice president of the British Veterinary Association, Gwen Rees, told me that they want an enriched colony cage ban to be accompanied by an import ban so UK farmers improve animal welfare but aren't put at further competitive disadvantage.
What we've done is look at these systems and compared them to barn housing, to free-range systems and organic systems. And while the enriched cages are a vast improvement on what went before, they still do not really provide the sort of health and welfare needs that we believe these animals require. So yes, they have some nesting space, some perching space and a scratch area, but they don't really have anywhere to dust bathe. They don't have access to outdoor space, for example, for foraging. And the space that the hens have within the enriched cages is much smaller than the space that they would be allowed in barn, free-range or organic systems. So we're talking just slightly bigger than the size of an A4 sheet of paper per hen within these enriched cages.
The NFU said in their statement to the consultation that a ban would simply increase the number of eggs being imported, some of which are produced to standards already illegal here. And they say that the British Veterinary Association rightly acknowledged the need for parity on import standards, and without that, the government is simply offshoring animal welfare. So they agree with your point, but they still think that enriched cages produce a valid product, which they say is at a price that people can afford.
It is a complicated issue and there is a delicate balance to be had around pricing, around things like carbon footprint as well for producing these eggs. I think, NFU and BVA both very rightly point out that if we don't have a kind of reciprocal arrangement with the eggs that are being imported into the country, then all this does is offshore the problem.
You might be okay if you try to implement a ban on enriched cages here in the UK. Only 20% of eggs are produced in that way. However, bringing it in for all imports would be much more difficult, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. It's a very complex area when we're talking about World Trade Organization rules or trade deals that are being made between UK government and other countries. There is no easy ban that can just be made for all eggs that come from these systems. However, there are different structures that the government has at its disposal to allow for these goods to be regulated and to allow for something along the lines of a mirror standards approach, for example, or bans that are linked to domestic bans. So there are different levers that the government have at their disposal, and what we are asking is that they use any structure that they have at their disposal to not offshore this problem.
Gwen Rees from the British Veterinary Association. A survey by the consumer group Which voted Northumberland National Park the best in the country, with its history, its peace and its facilities all scoring highly, but is also among the least visited. And that's something the park's former CEO, Tony Gates, has spent 20 years trying to change, amid arguing with the government over the park's funding. A few days before he left his job, he met our reporter Joe Lonsdale at one of his very favourite spots.
We're smack bang in the middle of Hadrian's Wall, if you think it runs coast to coast across the north of England. And we've got the wonderful view of Craglough and the Great Wind Sill, which runs right through this central section of Hadrian's Wall.
So you've got a few walkers going past. Hello. This is a place where you really have constant walkers.
Yeah, Northumberland's got space. And it's very much a border landscape. And I think, having grown up in Northern Ireland, there's something about border places. You can almost feel their history.
So you came here 20 years ago. What do you think you'll look back on as the things you're most proud of?
What makes me proud? That it hasn't been despoiled. Some of England's cleanest rivers are in Northumberland National Park. We're on our way to restoring nature, so the curlew is less threatened than it has been in the past. Our relationship with the local landowning and farming community is something that we've always put great store by. In the last few years we've been rolling out a programme called Farming in Protected Landscapes, which provides grant aid directly to farms, either for nature conservation work or for access projects or small projects to welcome people to the countryside. So I think it's been a really good relationship.
So we've come through the gate, we're just literally standing next to Hadrian's Wall. If we were to look over the top, we would be able to see the sill. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, that's something I'm very proud of. We built it as a National Landscape Discovery Centre. We built it to carry 100,000 visitors a year. It's never had less than 120. What I'm most proud of is seeing the people who engage with it. Watching the school group we've just watched walk up the crags, and they're staying overnight in the youth hostel. We built the youth hostel.
The wind's picking up a bit, isn't it?
If you dip down behind there.
Obviously we've touched on the things that you're most proud of there, but there's been a struggle, hasn't there? And that's about how you're funded.
Yes, there's quite a complex formula which government uses for funding national parks. But the long and short of that is Northumberland's never had its fair share of that. And I've had many battles over many years with government over this.
And since 2019, you've had the same amount of cash each year. So effectively your funding's being cut, in real terms anyhow.
Yeah, but we've got the same job to do. You get to a point where you're really struggling to do your statutory work, just the things you must do to operate legally. And you think, how serious are government about this? Landscapes, when you go run down through the list, define what the country is. The Lake District, the Peak District, the Broads, Dartmoor, Exmoor, the Yorkshire Dales, the North York Moors, Northumberland. We've had the COVID pandemic. What did that show us? That people absolutely need open spaces and national parks just as much. So that's why government should fund them, because they're good for people.
That report by Joe Lonsdale. Farmers at the Pig and Poultry Fair this week were comparing notes about a serious problem with out-of-sync supply and demand. And some pig farmers are finding themselves in a precarious position, with prices falling and pigs starting to back up on farms. The supermarket Morrisons has given notice to some of its farmers because of an oversupply in the market. It blamed the challenging economic climate. I asked editor of Pig World, Alistair Driver, about the extent of the backlog.
A lot of people are experiencing it to some extent. So maybe pigs are staying on for a couple of weeks longer than would otherwise be the case. They're getting heavier. They're managing it. Some people that are worst affected are, starting to burst at the seams. So it's bad, it's prolonged.
Just give us some of the reasons why this is happening.
It's just a combination of factors, really. In response to what was a relatively good time, some of the bigger companies have expanded herds, put more sows down. Last year, we had some good growth rates, good breeding productivity. That was compounded in the autumn by one of the big factories had a couple of weeks maintenance. That created a bit of a backlog on farms. Demand generally, it's been flat. The demand just hasn't been there. Pigs have built up gradually on farms. Some people worse affected than others, depending on their supply chains. Allied with it, I'm afraid, we've seen a downturn in European prices. That has put not necessarily import pressure. It's not necessarily that more is being imported to displace it, but it's put price pressure on. So the price has been falling. Add into that mix, you've got the war in the Middle East. That's starting to push up cost.
We know that Morrisons has given notice to some of its suppliers.
Well, that's kind of the biggest manifestation so far of what's happening. as a result of all of this, I think all of the supply chain is kind of looking at its numbers, across the board. Morrison's is blaming the general economic conditions, that the downward pressure on price. But yes, it's given typically it will be 6 months notice, but including some pretty big suppliers. And it's also apparently informed others that it'll be cutting back on numbers. So it's happening across the board, but that's the kind of the most obvious headline impact so far.
Do you think other supermarkets will follow?
Slightly different in that Morrison's owns its own abattoirs. It's more about the relationship between the producers and the processors. And I think it may be happening at a less kind of high profile level, but it's kind of inevitable when you have this really what is just an imbalance in the supply chain. And the problem is, for anybody that's been given notice, it's not the sort of environment where it's easy to pick it up elsewhere. However, I don't want to make it all sound doom and gloom. This is the pig sector. It is always cyclical. It will turn. The question on everybody's lips is kind of when and at what cost.
Editor of Pig World, Alistair Driver. Well, the threat of disease was another hot topic at the Pig and Poultry Fair, with Farming Minister Angela Eagle there to announce a new strategy on African swine fever. It's a very infectious virus found in pigs and pig meat. It doesn't affect people, but pigs can infect each other. It can also travel on boots or car tyres, and if someone discards infected meat, like a ham sandwich, it could be eaten by a wild boar or pig, which then gets the disease. ASF, as it's known, has been gradually spreading across Europe. Earlier this year in Spain, there was an outbreak involving more than 150 cases. It hasn't reached the UK yet, but the government here has already banned all personal meat imports from other countries. The government says the new strategy will help farmers avoid blanket movement restrictions, reducing pressures such as overcrowding and enabling day-to-day operations to continue more smoothly. The new measures also apply to classical swine fever, which did break out in the UK back in 2000 when 180,000 pigs had to be slaughtered as animal movement restrictions led to overcrowding. I asked the chief vet, Christine Middlemiss, what the new strategy means for farmers.
So it's all about making the framework, while still effective for disease control, a bit more tailored, responsible, flexible to the actual on-the-ground situation.
Are you releasing this strategy because you think the threat is imminent?
So we've been at medium risk of the incursion of African swine fever actually for a few years now. Most of that is because of the slow westward spread in Europe from wild boar. We do see these long distance jumps into Italy, into Belgium at one point, Germany and so on. And we're very mindful of that. We've learned a lot from how the Europeans and the Caribbean and others have been responding to their outbreaks. So, for example, this flexible approach. And we've taken those learnings and put them into the new strategy.
The reason why African swine fever crosses countries is often due to illegal imports of meat. Now, we've reported many times about the problem here in the UK. Last month, Dover Port Health Authority told us they intercepted more than 14.2 tonnes of illegal meat in the last week of March alone. So doesn't that have to change first?
So we continue to work with Dover and provide them with funding to look at exactly this, to pick up these illegal movements of meat. And the fact that they're finding some, whilst disappointing, means that having the checks is effective. But yes, managing the illegal imports continues to be really important, as does biosecurity at farm level too, and our ongoing advice about don't feed food products to pigs, even if you're out walking around and they're feral pigs.
The Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee heard that lorry loads of legal imported meat failing to get inspected at Fenton for their vet inspections. Now, have you got a hold of that? Because that obviously means that even though this stuff is legal, it's not getting inspected.
Well, it has documentary checks, which for me is the really important part. And because that's the bit, as you say, that, you check the export health certificate online and you can see, yes, it's come from a listed establishment. It's come from a part of a country that we know doesn't have disease. Those, for me, are the really critical checks in relation to animal health. We are working with both Fenton and the Inland Trading Standards and local authorities about following up on lorries that don't stop. Those are particularly for their physical checks of the product, which for animal disease is probably a bit less important. It's those export health certificates signed off by an official vet in the other country that really matter to me.
There is to be a new alignment with the EU. That's mentioned in the King's speech. That's supposed to make trade much easier, but doesn't it also mean that there's more of a threat if checks are slightly eased?
Well, being back in a single market or single SPS area, so animal health area, if you like, will mean that we will have access again to the IT systems and intelligence that is within the EU, which we don't have at the moment, and that will be hugely helpful. Understanding really quickly on the ground what disease situations are and working as a member of that single market to make sure it's controlled in the country of origin. So that, if you like, for me is a kind of trade-off. You get access to that intelligence, the systems and things.
These things have to be joined up, though, don't they? The strategy that you're announcing to deal with the disease if it gets here and the prevention of the disease getting here.
Oh, absolutely. You've got to do prevention, detection, response, and then a really important part for us that we maybe don't talk about so much is recovery. So, you've had an outbreak, but the key is to get back to disease-free status and back to trade again, because that's what drives product through the market.
Chief Vet Christine Middlemiss. Northern Ireland's biggest agricultural show, the Balmoral Show, is drawing to a close today. More than 100,000 people have visited the showground in Lisburn, southwest of Belfast, over the last 3 days, and more than 3,000 animals have been paraded around the show ring. It's one of those events that attracts the whole of the region, urbanites and countryside dwellers alike. Louise Cullen was there for Farming Today to discuss the politics of Northern Ireland agricultural policy, but first she experienced the emotional pressure of the exhibitors who've spent the last year working towards the final showdown in the ring.
She's just gone for a run around the ring there, but she's got a red rosette. We've got an emotional winner coming out here, an emotional owner. Oops, they're wrestling the sheep. Well, that win clearly meant a lot to you. Why is it so important to you, this red rosette?
She's special, just very friendly, so we love her,
We didn't think she was able to do it because she had 2 bad legs as a lamb, so we were told she was never going to be a show sheep, and then she goes and does that. In her class, it was very unexpected.
I'm just walking around the sheep area here, and we've got these fabulous sheep that look like they've overdone the bronzer. So you're doing a little bit of cleaning around the legs. And so tell us about this beautiful breed.
They're originally from France. They're Rouge de l'Ouest. They're translates into Red of the West. That explains the face and leg colour. We've been breeding them for 34 years now, so we like them for their easy lamb and just easy maintained.
So what do you do to them then before the show?
Their legs and faces would be trimmed, wool would be washed, and then spray at it to give a wee bit of colour.
And how hopeful are you of taking home a rosette?
They're here anyway, and we can't have them looking any better, so we'll see how we get on.
It's a little bit grey, but that's certainly not taking the edge off. The people are streaming through the Ulster Farmers Union enclosure. Also under cover is the union's new president, John McLenaghan. Lovely to see you, John. Congratulations.
Yep.
You're just new in post. What are your priorities?
It's about taking this industry forward. It's about representing our members. It's about having a farming environment that allows them to continue those generational farm businesses that are so much a characteristic of Northern Ireland farming.
But of course you're doing this against a backdrop of an awful lot of challenges, and they range from global geopolitical right down to local, don't they?
Challenges are part of farming. Weather challenges, we talk about the geopolitical challenges, the effects of what we're currently seeing from the American war in the Middle East. I think this has highlighted the need to actually protect and create a resilience, not just within the individual farming businesses, but more at a national level. So how do we protect ourselves from these type of geopolitical shocks? We stopped producing fertiliser in the UK about 3 years ago. That makes us vulnerable, and we did that because it was cheaper to buy it from somewhere else. That's the sort of long conversations we have to sit down and have and say, it's not just about the cost of some of these items, it's about that resilience and that availability of product at times when things get difficult. And an increase in fertiliser now is an increase in food later.
That's kind of looking externally, but looking inwardly, we're waiting for a new nutrients action programme. This is the programme that basically tackles water pollution from agricultural sources. It's been in place for nearly 20 years. We know that it had a slightly challenged consultation last year. We're now waiting on the stakeholder task and finish group coming back with a final document. What do farmers need from that plan?
We have spent an awful lot of time and effort in actually turning that around into something which actually will work at a farm level and will deliver in terms of water quality at an environmental level. And I think we're very close to having that all finalised.
But why the pushback when we know that you look at Lough Neagh and we know that agriculture is responsible for the bulk? There are other elements, of course, wastewater, septic tanks, industry and every single household in that catchment all play a part, but agriculture is responsible for the bulk of nutrient pollution in Lough Neagh, contributing to the blue-green algae crisis. Why has there been that pushback?
I wouldn't accept that agriculture is responsible for the bulk of those nutrients. There are many factors which have led to the Lough Neagh situation, and I think if we think too much about the percentages and who's responsible for what, we actually miss the bigger point, which is how do we actually fix this. As an industry, we have demonstrated over the last 15, almost 20 years of a nitrates programme what we have done as an industry in order to change practice, invest on our farms, improving water quality. We do manage our nutrients, we will continue to manage our nutrients, and we will do that in a way which actually maximises profit on our farms, because we do not want to see nutrients lost into Lough Neagh or any other water catchment.
Well, you're going to have a steady flow of members through this marquee today. They're all lining up for the tea already. I better let you go and get pouring.
Thank you, Louise.
The crowds are still watching to see which sheep take the prizes in the rings. Leaning on the railings here is the Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs Minister at Stormont, Andrew Muir. All right, well, Minister, we've had the great announcement here at Balmoral, of course, that the BBC Food and Farming Awards are coming to Northern Ireland for the first time. How excited are you to see a celebration like that coming to Northern Ireland?
Absolutely overjoyed, and I want to say thank you to everyone who's made this possible. This will be a real showcase for Northern Ireland. Show what's great in terms of our agri-food sector here. I know we've got challenges, but we have that real competitive edge. We have that really high quality food, but also produced to the highest welfare standards.
You mentioned the challenges. Of course, the big talking points here will be the 3 Fs. Farming is not the only F: feed, fuel and fertiliser. So what about farmers here? What are they getting from you?
And that's going to be the key issue that I'm raising with the DEFRA Secretary of State, because the UK government need to step up and support our farming community across the UK. And those challenges in terms of the cost of fuel, feed and fertiliser is something where they have the economic firepower to be able to get that support out. Because we're going to see this coming through in terms of food inflation. That could be up to about 10%, and I'm really concerned around that.
And of course we've had the EFRA Secretary of State, Emma Reynolds, here today. You've got that access. What are you telling her?
So I'm making it very, very clear we need that support in terms of those additional costs in terms of fuel, feed and fertiliser, but also in terms of this SPS Agri-Food Agreement, supporting to get that over the line and get it implemented as soon as possible. So I want to see that summit again taking place either next month or the beginning of July and get it implemented in 2027. We need to do that so that we can actually help trade across the whole of the UK and help our agri-food system in Northern Ireland.
And what about then those wider big picture issues that farmers are facing around pollution, the intensive livestock farming that we have here? How do they meet those pollution regulations, the Nutrients Action Programme requirements to moderate water pollution from agriculture? How do they meet those without extra government support?
So I'm very clear that government needs to assist a just transition so we can address those environmental issues, and that's why I'm going to be rolling out Sustainable Farm Investment Scheme in terms of that capital support. We also have over £300 million in terms of a Sustainable Agriculture Programme. But addressing those issues, we've got to do them together, and that's why we've set up a task and finish group in relation to the Nutrients Action Programme. I'm quite hopeful that'll be completed in the next few weeks, and we'll do a final consultation in regards to this, and then we'll be able to move forward. Together we can achieve so much more. I know we have got challenges, but I'm a glass half full type of person, and I'm someone who wants to get things done.
Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs of Northern Ireland, Andrew Muir there with Louise Cullen at the Balmoral Show. That's all for today. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Beatrice Fenton. Farming Today this week was a BBC Audio Bristol production.